What's up, y'all? Coast to Coast Podcast here from InsideCarolina.com. I am Joey Powell. Happy to see you. Happy to be seen. Happy to be here with Sherrell McMillan and Sean Moran. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Guys, season's over. Regular season anyway. Tar Heels absolutely mollywopped Virginia Tech. Peter rolled, mollywopped, skull dragged, any of those you want to use, at Blacksburg earlier in the week. And then I think a lot of folks were surprised at how they performed against Duke after being down early, came back, and then just got kind of outclassed by who, and I don't have a problem saying this because I believe it, is the best team in the country. Duke is just too deep, and we've talked about it multiple times that this is a talented, deep, really, really gifted Duke team that doesn't have a ton of flaws. And we talked about how they were a bad matchup for UNC because they are so tall. And that's just at every position. That's not tall on the back line. That's tall at every position. And so North Carolina loses. Second time they've lost to Duke this year. Ends the regular season. And we'll talk a little bit about what seeding now draws for them in the NCAA tournament, in the ACC tournament in Charlotte. But I'll come to you first, Sean. What was your biggest takeaway from the week? Again, 1-1 results, big win at Blacksburg, and then just running out of gas against Duke.
I think going back to the early part of the week, I think we were all a little nervous about playing on the road in Virginia Tech, and they certainly answered the call, and more so in that game in terms of the complete whooping that they did put on Virginia Tech, which was great to see, especially from an offensive standpoint, continuing what they did. But then it feels all forgotten to a certain extent with not being able to pull the big upset against Duke, just given a 10-point underdog at home. I don't think you see that often, especially in Chapel Hill. I think it does set up a lot of questions. I think watching them at the end of the first half put together a run to make it a game and a half, take a lead. Obviously got the emotions going and the hopefulness going as well. But then you saw them, and to your point, Joey, they would have had to play almost a perfect game, both offensively and defensively. And unfortunately, there are just too many possessions when they were up and when that lead was disappearing, where they weren't 100% crisp, where they lost track of their man for a second and gets beat back door, or lost track of their man for a second, or go a few possessions. And going back the past few weeks, we've talked about offensively how many times they've been able to avoid going 3 possessions or more without scoring, and all of a sudden Duke puts in Brown and offense goes to a sputter. So that was frustrating, not seeing them adapt a little bit more or try to do some things to get better shots, because you look at the assist total, which I think was the lowest or second lowest over the year, and the 3 factors for me: assists, the lack of offensive rebounding, which we knew was going to be tough, but then also the 3-pointers. They hit the over 8 that we always say about, but they hit 2 early on in the second half, and then they went cold the rest of the second half outside of Cadeau's 3 to cut it to 4. So it was a great start to the week and great in spurts, but frustrating in terms of the final result.
Yeah, I think the stats you pointed out are actually really, really telling. And North Carolina fans hate losing to Duke. I get that. That's totally normal, especially since they're your rival. And a lot of folks want to say, how much the talent gap is, and I don't think that's totally inaccurate when you look at this Duke team. I mean, you mentioned Malik Brown. Malik Brown was a multi-year starter at another ACC school, transferred to Duke, and was fine splitting time with Cameron Malawach. They are absolutely deep and loaded at multiple positions, but even a really good, dare I say, elite North Carolina team would have not just walloped this Duke squad. It would have been a battle no matter what. Sherrell, we saw, like Sean said, you saw the team actually do a lot of really good things, but they still seem to have some of the same problems that put them in this bubble position that they're in a sense that there were times where the offense stalled out. There were times where they weren't moving the ball. There were times where guys were just absolutely not doing the little things, and that's what they've been saying as a team over the last few weeks. It's whatever it takes, including all the little stuff. So there were times that showed up. Do you feel like maybe the Duke game was just kind of an encapsulation of what the season's been, or am I putting words in your mouth?
No, I think that's fairly accurate because it reminded me a lot of the early season UNC team in that they come out for a couple minutes with their hair on fire, playing well, and then inevitably the lead starts to grow for the other team. The defense starts to wane a little bit, which in this game it did, but it wasn't because of effort or attention to
Right.
detail. Duke was just better for
Right.
most of the part. They were making some tough shots, and their positional size was just better. But where the teams early in the season were building those 15, 20-point leads, and then Carolina, after halftime, typically at the beginning of the season, just goes on a run where they're playing with intensity. They're up on their man. They're doing whatever it takes, like you said, to win. This time is like the pattern of it all just got moved up about 5 or 6 minutes because they made the run, they got the lead, and then it was like they just dropped off the face of the earth. Like it's just I don't know, a combination of fatigue, a combination of Duke just kind of settling in and not panicking, very dissimilarly to what Carolina did in some of those games where they would have a lead and then start to panic and give it away. Duke didn't really do that. They just kind of stayed true to who they were and what they did. And I think Carolina didn't do that because what we've seen of Hubert Davis for 4 years now is kind of he's going to ride the guys who got him there. All the way back to the Iron Five, back to his second season where it was pretty much the same guys with Pete Nance just taking Brady Manick's place. To some degree, last year he only went 7 deep, and in this game it was kind of funny because it was like the opposite. It's like he decided he
Yeah.
needed to play more people. And I
Yeah.
understand fatigue.
Senior night, you get that.
Yeah, it's hot, it's fatigue. You're playing as hard as you possibly can. I get it, but at the same time, it's like if there was any game where you need to find a way to win, and it doesn't matter how many minutes somebody plays, as long as they're capable, then you have to do that. And I felt like it was pretty clear very early who was going to be able to make an impact in this game and who wasn't. And I felt like what happened in the second half was that the people who made the run weren't in the game, and the people who showed they weren't going to make an impact were in the game. And that's when the lead in no time pretty much went from UNC up 6 to down 10, and it felt like seconds. So it was, to me, it was kind of where the programs are, but also like Duke did what it does, and it succeeded, and it held out. And UNC, it felt like to me, deviated from kind of how they played things under Hubert Davis the last 4 years.
Yeah, and I think something for folks to think about. I think we said it last week too that it was going to take a Herculean effort from North Carolina in a sense that everybody was going to have to do their job, but there would also have to be some guys doing above their normal level, and then you would have to get some help from Duke. And I think when you saw Duke kind of giving them help in the first half, and I'm not saying North Carolina didn't earn it, but Duke got a little rattled, had a lot of turnovers, but once they, to your point, settled down, it just made things harder. And I do think that it was in seconds, especially in real time or in game time, that those 4 possessions. Not only did North Carolina stall out and go back to kind of pounding the ball into the floor, and one guy getting a shot without the ball moving very much, that very same sequence, Duke made a lot of big shots quickly. And just the timing of it was tough, but that's just what really, really good teams do. Something I think is on a lot of folks' minds. You didn't hear a lot of people complaining about Hubert Davis when the Tar Heels went on this little win streak, and that's just kind of how it goes. But last night it seems like the Fire Hubert crowd came right back out and were kind of venomous and fired up again, and I get that. That's just the way fandom goes. What I would ask y'all is, as we just saw North Carolina State parting ways with Kevin Keats, so I guess that means Kevin Keats is a leaver, or Kevin Keats is no longer an employee. North Carolina, a lot of fans still want Hubert Davis fired. And I want to reset and say, they've given him an extension. It's clear that they're not going to part ways, this offseason, at least on, North Carolina's part. So I want to ask you guys, looking at where things are right now, what are your thoughts about kind of everybody still feeling like Hubert isn't the guy, and and if you don't make a change right now, you're going to still be mired in 40 days in the wilderness or what have you. Like I can understand the frustration, and I can see that we understand that UNC is not playing up to the standard that has been set for the program. We understand that North Carolina has missed the tournament, two out of the last 5 years, and facing a third. Like, we all get that. What I want to ask you, Sherrell and Sean, and I'll go to you first, Sherrell. How do you feel like that? Does last night change anything? Does the dynamic with NC State cutting ties with a coach that went to the Final Four last year, does that change anything for you? Just where do you see this as a larger discussion about North Carolina basketball right now?
That is the loaded question of loaded questions there, Joey. You fit a lot in there.
Thank you for going to Sherrell first.
So what I've done is I try to say these things on social media, and I don't think folks hear it all, or they see one tweet instead of a larger context. But I obviously that there is still a section of the fan base that will not be satisfied unless North Carolina parts ways with Hubert Davis. I'm not judging that. I'm just, I want to ask you guys, like, what are your feelings on the heels of the end of the regular season and things kind of ending the way they did?
Yeah, for people who feel that way, I mean, you can make an argument. I mean, if we're being frank, like, again, this would be missing the tournament twice in 3 years. Go back and look at the history of North Carolina basketball, and outside of the stretch from 2000 to 2004, tell me how many times it's happened. And what happened to that coach after less time in a different era where you couldn't rebuild every offseason. So I understand completely the perspective of people who say that UNC maybe should move on. Now, I think there's no point for me. There's not really a point in talking about it because
they're not going to do it this year.
The intel has been for some time, which we tried to share, is that they're not going to do it. Now, why they're not going to do it, that's a question that Bubba Cunningham and Chancellor Roberts would have to answer themselves, because I don't have that answer. We don't talk to them. we don't hear from them, but we know that for some time the plan has been to bring him back. Now, again, the reasoning, that's only something they can give. I would say that the reason NC State went ahead and did it, it seems like, is because, they were lower than low. This was pretty much their 8-20.
The bottom fell out for them right after the highs last year.
Right. So, and they wanted to, I mean, honestly, this would have happened last year had he not made the miraculous run. So it was kind of inevitable. And I think, if we're being frank again, I think that's part of the worry from that side who wants to move on from Hubert Davis, is that, well, what happens if they have an average season next year? Are you going to prolong it and go into year, I guess that would be year 6? And hope that it gets better? Or, what happened, so I get it. I don't think anybody is wrong in this debate. And for the people who want to keep Hubert Davis, I think there is a solid justification on their side to keep him based upon how you can change a team in a year. So it's difficult to say, like, what exactly the state of North Carolina basketball is. It's not good. We can all agree on that.
Or even, I think a different way to say it is it's not up to the standard that has been set for the program. And I think anybody within the Smith Center would agree with that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can't, in an ACC this bad, you can't finish 5th and only win. They won 12 ACC games or 13 ACC games. I mean, the ACC is not far away from being a mid-major conference. That sounds like hyperbole, but it's not. And that's not even metrics. That's just on head-to-head results and all that stuff. So I think both sides have a case, and that's what's going to make this offseason and this next year very, very strenuous, very pressure-filled, combustible, because I think everyone in the Smith Center realizes that they're coaching for their jobs next year because of how this year went. So it's tough. I mean, we haven't been in this situation covering a UNC coach, a basketball coach who's under turmoil in 20 years, and it hasn't been in the social media era either. So that is another thing that kind of changes the dynamics. But I'm rambling, so I would say I think both sides are perfectly justified in how they feel. The frustrating part is that neither side is going to acquiesce to the other if there's additional information that doesn't marry
fit the narrative
viewpoint.
Yep.
Right. So if next season, he has an average year and is a 5 seed or a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, then everyone who kept Hubert Davis is going to say, oh, it's awesome. They're a 5 seed or 6 seed, which we know is not up to the standard of Carolina, right? So they would be in the wrong. But if they go 31-2 and are a 1 seed, then the people who want him gone will say, "Oh, it's luck. He got a GM and they found some players
The
in the
GM got
portal."
players for him. Yeah,
Right,
that's fair.
right. So the issue is that it's at the point with the fan base where they're dug in, and there's never going to be any acquiescing from either side. So that's kind of the definition, I think, of a toxic fan base. Not in a bad way, each individual person toxic, but just in there's no the communal feel is gone because everybody's in their distinct camps.
Yeah, it does feel very much like a post-truth era conversation around around North Carolina basketball. Sean, I'm gonna twist this a little bit and throw it into your lap. I think Sherrell makes really good points in the sense that you can feel like Hubert Davis is not the right guy. I want to make clear to the folks that are listening and watching this. This show will never be one that like jumps on here and rants and raves one way or another. It's just not really. It's not really our steez. It's not really our mo. It's not really what Inside Carolina is about. But don't feel like that just because we're not banging the table and raising our voices that that means we condone mediocrity or anything. It's not really our place. So I want to get that out there. But Sean, something I'd like to ask you. We've talked about the North Carolina standard. That standard was set about 30 years ago. Do you think that maintaining that standard is still doable nowadays? And here's the context I'm going to give you. I think Duke has threaded the needle perfectly so far in their third or fourth year post Coach K, but they have not had the results that they wanted. Now, granted, they're doing incredibly well this year and will be the favorite to cut down the nets in April. But you look at what's happened at Kansas. You look at what's happened at some other perennial powerhouses. UConn has won back-to-back titles, but they weren't really there until they were there, if that makes sense. So do you feel like the standard that North Carolina has built is even applicable in 2025 and 2026? Do you think that it's even possible with this new age of players not really being bound to a school for more than one season? Is that still even a standard that's able to be lived up to?
Great question. I think from a standard, it is hard, but in terms of the standard that they're at now is not where it can be. Given the history, given the results, given the brand, it's not a school that should be on the bubble year in and year out. And I think the frustrating, we just looking at the Duke for instance, great year to me, a lot like 2015, where they do have transcendent freshmen, and they've been able to put around a lot of strong veterans with that team. Go back a year ago, both the UNC Duke games, UNC controlled the matchups throughout and pretty much flipped it. Unfortunately, Duke ends up going farther. UNC stumbles against the team I was definitely most scared of seeing in that bracket.
But even then, I'm sorry to step on you, Sean, but even then, it's not like Duke had a bad roster, right? Like Duke still had a roster with some very high-level, elite, one-and-done players.
Right, and that's been built over the last 13 years. I think UNC and going to Hubert Davis, I don't think they've ever known what they truly want to be in terms of going back to identity and player type. I think right now, Duke and Shire have built towards what they want to be from that. Going back to last year, they had no size in the post, so their defense was just you could get to the rim at will. Now they have a lot of shot blockers, length, etc. But for UNC to get to, there's still a standard for them. Are they going to be top 5 every year? No, I think that's going to be tough. Even some of the SEC schools, I think, will have a downfall next year where a Mark Sears or a Broom, they're not coming back. So similar to UConn, there's going to be a drop-off. But to me, it's that competitiveness. And you look at the Q1 non-conference games, and that, I think, to me, is going to be the kicker when we're talking probably next Sunday. But you look at the results across the board from the first year, and I think to me and a lot of people, that's probably been the frustrating aspect of not being able to get the non-conference wins. Sure, you can say some are against the top 5 elite teams this year, but Villanova last year, Kentucky last year, and you can go on. And I think that's the frustrating point. And I think it is an area where they should be a top 15, 20, especially given if you mess up in recruiting or if you mess up in the portal, there is the ability to quickly reload the next year instead of being stuck with that team for 2 to 3 years. But at the same time, it does put that much pressure on proper evaluation and proper identification, as well as quickness, which they were missing last year.
And that's a good segue. You were talking about the Q1 games at the beginning of the year. I think a lot of folks who follow Carolina basketball, where they're trying to reconcile as well, is that I think Taylor said this yesterday, Vipolis, is like UNC right now is a tournament team.
Right now,
we all
yes.
agree with that.
Yep,
they are.
agree.
But
and hang on, Sherrell. And
Yeah,
people who don't see that this team is better now than they were a month ago, I can't help you. I'm not saying that there's any excuse for the way they played earlier this season, but I can't have a serious conversation if folks don't acknowledge that regardless of level of competition, the team has been executing better in the last 6 weeks. Go ahead.
I mean, they're top 20 over the last 4 weeks and top 5 offensive team.
And that is independent of opponent. Go ahead, Sherrell.
So I guess the point I'm trying to make is like the NCAA tournament bid, it's not completely lost, but more than likely they're not going to the tournament. It wasn't lost last night, Saturday night against Duke.
Right.
It was lost when the players and coaches, for whatever reason, showed up to Florida unprepared to play, got down by 20, had to fight their way back, and lost a semi-neutral home game against what ended up being a top 10 team. It's the same thing where they almost did the same thing to UCLA. The same thing with, I think Alabama was just a terrible matchup and just better. So very much like Duke. Same thing with Auburn. But Michigan State, you just didn't, for whatever reason, show up to play in a way that is conducive. We're talking about standards. It's conducive to whatever the standard is. It's supposed to be a UNC. Against Dayton, you had to come back by 20. So, my issue is that last night wasn't the problem. November and December, when you didn't show up in the first half and got down by 20 and didn't have the sense of urgency, like, oh, we've got 25 games. The regular season isn't over yet. We've still got all of ACC play. ACC play is almost it almost doesn't matter. Like Clemson, Duke, Louisville is kind of what matters in the ACC.
The rest of it was
year.
like an extended preseason that started in January.
Exactly. And so if you're going to schedule this way, if you're going to have these games, you have to win some of them. And in order to win games, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial. You have to show up in the first half. What did Hubert Davis say in his first press conference?
We're going to fight. We're going to show up.
We're going to show up. And they didn't. And now they're paying for it 3.5 months later. And that's a shame because I do think this is a team that if they somehow find its way into the tournament, could get hot and do something. But they're probably not going to have the opportunity because they didn't take it seriously or didn't prepare or whatever back in November and December. To me, if you're going to talk about indictments of the program or of coaching or whatever, that is a bigger indictment of Hubert Davis and the program and, all around it than what happened on Saturday night. Because Saturday night, they ran into a buzzsaw. That's the best team in the country. I don't think anyone would argue with that. They have everything you need to win a championship. And so the bar right now, I know Carolina fans want it to be Duke into the best team in the country, but that's not the bar they're at right now. The bar more so where they're at is Michigan State and a top 10, top 15 program. So when you just don't handle your business like you're supposed to, it comes back to haunt you. And that's, to me, the biggest indictment of the program is that for whatever reason, they couldn't get up for those games or started so poorly that it was over before it started.
Hang on, Sean. Hang on, hold your thought. That's one of the things I think folks need to probably hold in context too. I felt as if the game against Duke was a referendum on the season, and I don't know that it was. And Sherrell, I would almost ask you, do you think that before I get to Sean, do you think that maybe Hubert Davis's approach during the early season was that, all right, we'll get this figured out as we go through these games, and then by the time you realize, holy hell, we haven't won any of them, maybe it was too late. So I'd be willing to bet, you remember Roy Williams used to do this. He would have a couple of throwaway games, 1 or 2, not necessarily 5 or 6, but he would have a few throwaway games where he would let the team lose to recognize the bigger picture. And I wonder, I don't know this, I have not heard this, I have not been told this, but I wonder if maybe Hubert Davis had the same approach with this really tough non-conference schedule, thinking that it would toughen them up and that they would be right enough, at the end of or the middle of December, end of December, to kind of withstand it. Sean, go ahead, man.
I'll let Sherrell.
No, I was just saying, I'm not trying to disparage Hubert Davis, but you can't compare him to Roy Williams. Like, Roy Williams is one of the 5 best coaches of all time. So, like, if he thought that he could do that, then I think there's maybe some growth that needs to happen from him
He
personally.
learned under him. I guess what I'm saying is you could see why he would have taken that angle if that's indeed what happened.
Perhaps. And then to your point, he said that with like 4 regular season games left, that there's still time. This team can still get better and improve. And I don't know. To me, that's
a head scratcher.
It's like it's too late. The time to have this urgency was the first half in the Spectrum Center in December, not
against Florida.
Not late February. Go ahead.
I think it's very easy to Monday morning quarterback everything. But I know there were a lot of issues early on. But at the same time, we're Monday morning quarterbacking the same thing that happened 2 years ago in terms of there was a lot of opportunities. They were up 8 or 9 in so many games, and then they 4 minutes they just let some of these games go away. I think if this goes to being, once again, this is looking at the picture where it is and being able to look backwards. But if you know that, hey, we have an extremely strong early conference, there was a lot of pressure on winning that UCLA game. There's not going to be a lot of Q1 wins in the ACC. We know our ACC schedule. We're not getting Clemson. We're not getting Louisville at home. You're not getting Wake at home. You got Pitt. So to me, it goes back, hey, in that 1 week period, should they have tried to play a game like Duke did against Illinois that's outside of the conference? Because if you put UNC or the ACC against a majority of, and everybody's looking at the ACC where they just got smacked, and I think the SEC was legit at that point. But if you put them against the Big Ten, Big East, even Big 12, I think there's the story, the narrative around the ACC, I think would change in terms of some of these wins are going to look better versus the quote-unquote quad 1 win, which there is a significant difference between that. But that's just one small piece of the issue, is that once you're locked into these ACC games for 3 months, so many of these games have been, hey, you can't lose them versus what you're seeing in the Big Ten, just teams racking up these mediocre quad 1 wins, or Oklahoma, etc. But it does go to they missed out in the portal, and they haven't fully put the pieces together, and it's kind of been I'd say a haphazard approach from the recruiting and even the portal perspective.
And it's been now 4 years of this where the ACC has kind of gone down as a conference. Its stature
it's been
has gone
falling
down.
off. It is now completely at the bottom of the ravine. Yes.
So, if you see that and you understand what's happening, then you have to adjust. Like, I know it sounds great to schedule these tough teams and play these tough games because that's what you want to do and you want to test yourself. You got to be smart too. And part of that is understanding what the committee, which your athletic director is the head of the selection committee this year.
That's
so
a head scratcher.
He should be able to give some keen insight, even moving forward. He should be able to give some keen insight into what they're looking for. I know it can change from year to year, but overall, and you should be able to say, okay, if this is the way they're looking at things, then this is the way we have to schedule. Yes, it's going to be bad that maybe they can't do a home and home with insert, Power 4 school here that everybody wants to play. That'll get the Smith Center going. But you have to do what's best for your team when it comes to this time of year, because the ultimate goal is to get into the tournament and win the tournament. And if you're struggling and on the bubble every year, which North Carolina's been 3 of the last 4 years, then you need every advantage possible. And that's something that has to be worked on organizationally and talked about, and saying what's the best way to ensure that we're in the NCAA tournament every year, that we're getting the additional money from the NCAA tournament, and that we're giving our coach and our team a chance to be successful in it. And right now, I don't think that's particularly happening. They're just scheduling the way they've always scheduled. And I'm sorry for getting on the rant, but we talked about it a year ago. You have to game the net. Why do you think Oklahoma, when they were in the Big 12, they weren't a great team, but when Carolina played them in the Spectrum Center for the Jordan Invitational, they were top 15 in net and top whatever and whatever. It's because they beat a whole bunch of teams who were sub 200 by 35. So
they weren't a top 15 team. They were a top 15 team in number only.
Right. I know they missed the tournament last year, but if that is how it's going to be determined, then that's how you have to schedule. And if they change it, then you adjust. But there's no adjusting. And that's the frustrating part for me as far as like the scheduling part of it, because you know what the ACC is. You know you're going to get 3 or 4, maybe if you're lucky, Q1
If you're
opportunities.
lucky, and if everybody lives up to their expectation,
right,
which didn't happen this year.
Right, and you're going to get maybe 2 at home. You can pretty much count on Duke being one, and maybe another one, and that's it.
Which is a crazy stat in itself.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, the scheduling thing is a part of it, but it all flows into this notion of like slow to adapt for UNC.
And I think that's if you want to have, if you want to kind of beef about some things, I think all of those things are valid and all of those things are on the table. And Sherrell, to your point, I do think you're right in a sense that, for a long time, North Carolina kind of lived into this Carolina way thing that Dean Smith built with reverence, and rightfully so. I'm not criticizing that mindset. But things have changed and evolved so rapidly recently that you kind of want to look and say, okay, is North Carolina evolving at the rate that the game is evolving? And I think that's where, if fans really want to criticize and really want to be vehement, I think that is 100% fair game in a sense that larger scale, not necessarily, I think people are quick to want to look and blame things in the course of a game. That's a different conversation. But I think to your point, Sherrell, I think North Carolina and maybe even UNC athletics as a whole has traditionally been one not to innovate. And we've talked about it here before, where even hiring Jim Tanner shows that they're not only just innovating, but they're trying to get ahead of things and maybe try to be a little more predictive of what the future looks like. What were we going to say, Sherrell?
No, that's it. I'm ranting. So that's
okay.
all. I just think there is a way to the Carolina way doesn't have to leave.
It doesn't have to go away. No, I agree.
So I just as the people who are saying like you need to scrap everything and just go out and win. You don't have to do that either. But you also can't live in kind of how you did. There's a way. Joe, you don't buy a house the same way you did 30 years ago. There's a lot of stuff
people are buying
different.
houses now without even seeing the houses. Like
right.
I can't wrap my head around it, but it's the nature of the market.
It's the nature of the market, so you have to adjust. And it doesn't mean a full wholesale changing and discarding of everything and every way you've ever done it. It just means, to use Hubert Davis's words, you have to tweak, alter, and pivot. And so there's not enough tweaking, altering, and pivoting going on. And I think that's one of the reasons Carolina is where it's at now. It doesn't mean it's not going to get better or it can't get better. It's just where things are as of today, March 9th, 2025.
Yeah, and so we'll talk a little more about that in the future, about kind of what things may or may not look like when this season ends. Again, it does feel like North Carolina is outside looking in. It does feel like that, just the fact that they have not been able to win any real games of consequence this year is probably going to be the epitaph that's put on the season whenever the final whistle sounds. And you really hate that for a kid like R.J. Davis. We'll talk about him and kind of the whole season on some future shows, but it was good to see him get his flowers, both literally and figuratively, in the Smith Center against Duke, and see him hitting some of his vintage shots. Vintage shots make me think about vintage jerseys, throwbacks even, like Johnny T-shirt. JohnnyT-shirt.com. Baseball Diamond Heels baseball team dropped a tough one on Friday night, season opener, or the series opener against Stanford, who Stanford is actually a really, really good team. Came back and ruled them on Saturday, and as we're recording this, they're playing again and are down. But I share all this because been some good crowds at the Bosch this week. And I think that will continue to happen, especially if basketball ends early. Folks need something to be happy about, and there's a lot of other really good teams on campus. So hoping that, if you go out and see some of the lax squads, or go out and see the Diamond Heels, or, maybe if you're going to see any of the other clubs that softball's doing really well too, go buy Johnny T-shirt. Get your gear. If Johnny T-shirt doesn't have it, you don't need it. All right? I've said that multiple times, but use that code that you find on the premium message boards. You will get an extra discount, 10% off of top of their already great prices. They have lots of sales going on all the time, especially in between seasons. So there's a chance for you to really upgrade your wardrobe. There's a chance for you to get off the bubble with your gear and actually firmly plant yourself as a one seed of the North Carolina attire that the folks in your circle have. We appreciate Johnny T-shirt sponsoring this show. There'll be some national guys that will drop some ads in here on the audio version, so hang tight. We'll be right back on the Coast to Coast here on InsideCarolina.com. Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan, appreciate you guys being here. I'm Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. Guys, Not only did North Carolina lose to end the regular season against Duke, the way the chips fell were probably the most damning for whatever small chance they had to earn their way back on the right side of the bubble. SMU lost at Florida State, which bumped them down to, I think, 6. Wake Forest ended up as the 4 seed, but North Carolina will be the 5 seed, which means that they cannot get to the finals of the ACC tournament without going through Duke again. And even worse, the teams that are on their side of the bracket, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, and Wake Forest are the 3 teams that North Carolina would probably play before Duke were they to win. None of them are quad 1 teams. So it just turned out to a real smorgasbord of poop for North Carolina based on how the game finished in Chapel Hill on Saturday night. Sherrell, going into the ACC tournament, I'll throw it to you. Is there, aside from making a run to the final day and beating Duke, is there anything that can happen in the college basketball landscape that could change North Carolina's fortunes? And even if they did, do you think it matters?
No, I don't think there's anything that could change their fortune. I mean, SMU really was the big issue here, because the way it was starting to line up is like, okay, we understand that North Carolina is a huge underdog against Duke. They're probably going to lose. Duke's a terrible matchup. So if SMU had won, and I guess in the retrospect, we shouldn't have expected them to win Bunny's last game at Florida State. But if SMU had won, then Carolina would have dropped to the 6 seed. They would have played, still a decent team in that first round. If they won, then they would have had an opportunity to play either Louisville or Clemson and get that quad 1 win. As it stands now, the only quad 1 opportunity they're going to have is probably Duke, and that's even if they get past Pitt/Notre Dame and or Wake Forest. And it's like the worst possible team.
It is the worst possible draw.
The worst possible matchup. Like everything that went wrong, everything that could go wrong went wrong from a UNC standpoint this weekend. So, I mean, it's back to where they were a week ago, which is, okay, you've got 4 games. If you can win 4 games, you have a chance to play in the NCAA tournament. So you got to win a regional essentially to get to the NCAA tournament. And Notre Dame, they beat them by 1 on a miracle play. Probably shouldn't have won that game. Pitt, they had them beat and then lost. Then they beat them on kind of a miracle. Lowe missed a close shot at the end there. And then if they were able to win that, Wake Forest. Now I do think they're a better team than Wake Forest, but they weren't playing well when they played Wake Forest back at the end of January and lost that game by 1 as well. And so then you have a chance to go to Duke. So it's like, I don't know, man. It would take every bubble team losing and no bid stealers, and then Carolina maybe losing a buzzer beater to Duke or something. Maybe that gets them in short of being Duke, but I just don't see it. A 13-loss team with 1 Q1 win, with the way everybody says they do things now, just doesn't seem particularly viable. But we back in 1999, they lost 13 regular season games and wound up in the Final Four. So who knows, man?
It's really absurd when you think about it. I mean, it's the perfect example of, you made your bed, now you got to lie in it. I mean, you think about, maybe getting 1 stop against Stanford, or getting, getting a stop against, or holding on against Pitt, or not folding against Wake Forest, like any of those,
or just not being so lackadaisical in November and December. I hate to keep going back to it, Joey, but I mean,
you're not wrong.
Why we talked about it back then, like the way they came out against Florida, and I know I keep going back to that, and I know it was 3 months ago, but that is, I don't know if I've ever been as perplexed with a team as that one, because even then we were all saying, we were like, man, if they don't win this one, it's going to start to look dicey because they don't have many opportunities left, and it just came out flat. And it's like, you watched them yesterday, and I understand you can't give 100% against, 100% against Duke is not the same as 100% against most teams, or even 90% against most teams. Like it's far and beyond. But like, imagine if they had just played with some of the shot making and the defensive intensity, and
sharing the ball,
physicality,
all of these.
Just not even at 100%. If they do that 80% against Stanford, they win that game. If they do that 80% against Wake Forest, they win that game. And we're not even talking about a bubble. So it is nobody's fault but North Carolina's that they are in the situation
Agreed.
They're in. And that's where the frustration comes in. Again, Duke is a better team than North Carolina this year. There's no one questioning that. Like the thought that North Carolina was going to beat Duke, considering the matchups and everything, just it was far fetched, and we all maybe believed it because we wanted to, or it's the hope that kills you or whatever.
The hope that kills you.
The Duke game was not the issue. The issue is all that other stuff, and that's the frustrating part.
Which goes, once again, 2 years ago, you get that Alabama game early on. They're a 1 seed. You had multiple opportunities this year. Same thing, 3-day tournament. Even the Michigan State, right? That this is by far the best team in the Big Ten, now a top 10 team. Granted, they did not have their best player, which I think gets glossed over. But then even Florida, even forgetting the first half, you hold on the final 4 minutes. You lock
if they just held on. That's a great word, Sean. If they just held on, you didn't have to be great the last 4 minutes. Just hold on to what you had.
It's just one of the Kansas, Michigan State, Florida. One of the that's to me that's the difference in what will be us talking about next week, most likely.
And so you talk about the standard, not falling apart when you're up late is a part of the standard, and that's just happened way too many times the last few years. It seems like I'm venting, and it seems like I am Monday morning quarterbacking a little bit, but I promise I'm not. These same feelings were there, against that Florida game.
We said it. We said it after the games. If folks want to go back and listen, we didn't have as many examples to lean into, but we said it after those games, and I think that it's totally fair for you to rant now if you want.
So, but so I've been negative for 40 minutes, so I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. They still have an opportunity to play their way into the tournament, and
that was a hard left turn, bro. I love it.
Yeah, I know. But it's true. Like, in spite of all this, in spite of how unmotivated they looked at times, how bad they shot at times, some of the awful defensive performances, it's still in their hands. Now, granted, it would take a lot, 4 games in 4 days, one against an arch rival who is much better than you, is a terrible matchup, and has already beaten you twice. It would take a whole lot. Not saying it wouldn't, not saying it's likely. But the opportunity is still in their hands, and they have been playing better. Like the team that Notre Dame or Pitt is going to see is much different than the one they saw the last time they played. Same thing with Wake Forest. So that is, if you're on the positive side, if you're a half glass full type person, that is the hope you have to look at, is that even against Duke, they still, outside, for 30 minutes against Duke, they shot really well against arguably the best defensive team in the country. And R.J. Davis, after some struggles, he ended up shooting 37% from 3 in ACC games. So he rounded his way all the way pretty much back up to where he typically is. So there are some positive things. Drake Powell, we can talk about him if you want to, but like, dude, if I'm Jim Taylor, if I'm UNC, like that is
Drop
my number one
bag, as the
that
kids
is my
say.
number one, free agent portal whatever target. Like, I'm trying to get Drake Powell back. I mean, he's playing so well offensively, defensively. He just brings a calmness to the team. He shares the ball. He's the type of player you win with, and he's really good. A lot of times, quote unquote, the type of player you win with is used as like a pejorative. It's like, he's not that talented, but he plays hard. No, Drake plays hard, and he's really talented. So those are the kind of things, the positives, if you're that type of person, that you can look towards next week, starting with Pitt or Notre Dame. And I'm going to yield my time because I've talked a whole bunch, so I'm going to yield my time.
One of the things I think you make a good point about is, you wonder how Drake Powell performs if he's an early option in the offense, or if they can build an offense or some design around his athleticism and his skill.
My counter, 39% from 3. He's going to end up having one of the 5 or 6 best 3-point shooting seasons by UNC freshmen. And his counterpart, Ian Jackson, is in line.
It's probably close too.
Is going to have likely the best, or right there with Rashad. So
it's one of those things that again, if you want to look for silver linings, and people can accuse us of being Pollyanna or whatever, but that's real. If you're talking about next season, it does make you wonder, if Drake Powell is emphasized looking forward, you wonder how that might scratch. And you also wonder how it might work for the rest of this year in the ACC tournament. Again, and I don't love the plus-minus stat, but I do think that it shows a lot. And I think he's one of those players where it doesn't necessarily lie to you very much. Sean, is there anything I don't want to ask you the same question I asked Sherrell, but is there anything that you think could salvage this season um, aside from beating Duke? Because again, I don't even think Duke would play a game before they played North Carolina. Or who would they would have one game against somebody?
They'd have the 8-9
It's
matchup.
like Georgia Tech and somebody, I think.
Yeah, they're not losing that.
Virginia.
Okay, yeah, never mind that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would love to somehow have UNC be able to match up against Louisville, right? In an ideal scenario, I think they could take Louisville on a neutral court. Clemson, that might be a little tougher. But I mean, going back the last 2 weeks, we put scores on our confidence level, and I don't think in my estimation, I didn't really think they were beating Duke, and I think I was in that 4 to 4-9 range-ish. Once again, the Q1, that is going to be a tough hurdle, but hey, we saw UVA get into the first 4 last year, so you never say never. But I think it does go back to what Sherrell's talking about. Okay, they just put together a great stretch offensively. Different lineups. The team was gelling, has looked a lot better. Shooting, rebounding the ball offensively, and they need to, I think, show that. They have opportunities to show that against the Pittsburgh Notre Dame winner, and then ideally, if they win that, then they get Wake Forest, who they've struggled with on the road over the past few years. This will be neutral, but I think for me, just play up to what we've seen against those two teams and win those 2 games, and then let the chips fall.
See what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But once again, if they don't and they lose one of those 2 games, which could easily happen, then that kind of solves all the issues, unfortunately. But I do think play well, and we'll hold out a little hope, even though I think in the back of our mind we probably know the answer. But once again, 2 years ago they weren't playing that well. I can go back and look. They weren't playing that well down the stretch. Versus this team has been playing well. It's just come against ACC teams that are ranked in the low 80s, 90s, and hundreds. But once again, it goes back to, in my mind, the ACC is overperformed in the tournament because some of these teams are not as bad as what the records are showing. And I think if they did get in, they'd be able to compete against anybody besides maybe the 1 seeds for the most part. But they have to play 2 very good games to even be in that discussion.
Yeah, and then they would play Duke on their 3rd game in 3 days. I will say to anybody who's watching or listening, at this point, hope is a 4-letter word. Proceed at your own peril.
I mean, how many times have we seen UNC as great as they've been in their championship years lose in the ACC tournament?
They show up at 12 that day, looking sleepy, and they barely beat Clemson, and then
they get boat raced the next game.
Yeah, Miami gets them the next game or something. Yeah.
All right, so let's get to some recruiting. Shifting gears a little bit, Sherrell, in spite of the results on the court against Duke on Saturday night, North Carolina had a bevy of recruits in the house, including all 3 of their signees for next season who were honored at mid-court during the game. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the class of 2025 was there. Caleb Wilson, Isaiah Dennis, and Derek Dixon. I did it correctly. Wilson arrived late. His family drove up and they had a flat tire, unfortunately, so he didn't get there until late in the first half. And then in the 2026 class, 2 more in-state guys, Cole Clower, who was quickly approaching the Brandon Ingram, Harry Giles, Jaron Stevenson unofficial visit award.
I think once you get to a certain point with these local guys, if they're not going, then just get rid of them.
Yeah.
So he was there, and then also a new name, Cody Peck, who plays for Garner Road. He is from down here in Matthews, but he actually goes to school at IMG in Bradenton, Florida. So he was there as well. And then 2027, LJ Smith from Lincolnton, the prolific scorer. He took his 2nd visit to UNC in the last few weeks. And then Jordan Page, who's a who's a sophomore from Raleigh, also nationally top 10, highly ranked guy. He was there as well. So Smith and Page, both top 30 in 2027. Clower, top 20, I believe, in 2026. And then, of course, the 2025 commits and signees. So it was a good atmosphere. We talked to a couple of them. They all said, how amazing the atmosphere was, how loud it was, what you would expect from a Duke-UNC game. And I think fans think because UNC lost the game that maybe that is a negative. But I think for someone like Caleb Wilson, just exchanging text messages with him, it was like more of an awe moment that, I can, in his mind, he can be Cooper Flag next year. And, you want someone with that kind of confidence who believes they're going to make that kind of impact. So, always a good thing to have those guys on campus to see that environment. There have been games where Carolina won and they had better players there and they didn't get them. And there have been games where Carolina lost by 20, didn't look good, and they got great players who attended. So I wouldn't say the individual game impacts their decision that much, but it's always good to have those guys on campus for UNC and the staff.
I'm still waiting for you to have one of these follow-up conversations with a recruit, and he's like, yeah, man, the whole weekend was ass. I hated it. This was terrible. I don't even know why I wasted my time. My parents are mad. The food was garbage. Our hotel room had bugs. Like I'm waiting for one of those, right?
If Bryce Johnson was a junior in 2025, he'd be the top candidate.
Man. Whew. Well,
after his visit, it was like he didn't want to talk. Everybody talked about. I know this is random, but everybody we talked to after his visit was like it was terrible. It was awful. He didn't enjoy it, and then he commits like 3 days later. So. Yeah, it would have been him if anybody.
Oh, that's fabulous. All right, guys, let's do our 2 cents and get out of here. And also do want to acknowledge that Caleb Wilson's high school team did win their state championship. And I can't remember what the level that is for the private schools in Georgia, but they did win handily in their title game, and he put up some pretty gaudy numbers. Our 2 cents brought to you by Congruity. You guys know Congruity. You've heard us talk about them thousands and thousands of times. So why do we do that? Because we believe in them. Yeah, they are a sponsor, but also we don't take sponsors that we don't think have good business models and bring good value to our subscribers. And Congruity is one of those. I want you to email matt@congruityhr.com if you own or operate a small or medium-sized business. That will start an engagement with you that will allow Matt to assess how they may be able to help your business. They may help you save some money. They may be able to optimize some things for you with regard to your back office, payroll, benefits, human resource, all of the stuff that can kind of bog you down as you're trying to own or operate your company. Matt's expertise and the resources they have at Congruity can help you understand where you may be losing money and where you might be able to tighten things up a little bit. And even more importantly, it might give you some time back and allow you to focus on what you're really passionate about or what you really got into business for. Matt@congruityhr.com. We appreciate their support. We hope that you guys will, again, reach out to them, get that free assessment. You'll be glad you did. In worst case scenario, it's free. You haven't lost anything. More than likely, you'll gain something. All right, Sean, give me your penny, bro.
All right. Well, similar to last year, the season came down to a Jalen Withers shot. Now, there are some other things in that game, but I think for this year, in these remaining games, I do not want to see the three, or I don't want to see that often is the 3-guard plus lineup. So UNC need, Drake Powell 35 plus minutes, which means Jalen Withers he's going to be that swing of sorts in terms of how well he's playing or not in terms of how far they go. So they need more of the traditional lineup with a 3, 4, and 5 from a size perspective. And we saw it against Duke. They had RJ score well, and then Lubin got it just barely into double figures in 11. Everybody else outside of double figures. So that balanced scoring disappeared. Seth Trimble 1 for 9 from the field. And teams are going to focus on the strengths and weaknesses of the players. So you need guys that can consistently score, and UNC needs to be pretty much 100% from what lineups they're using and how they're reading the game. But definitely in my mind, the taller lineup, just from a defensive perspective, gives them more length and more ability to create havoc, which turns into easier baskets. So each game, hopefully we see that iron 5 or iron 6 for the tournament as long as they can get them however many games that is, 1, 2, 3 or more.
And Sherrell alluded to this earlier. I think you're onto something there, Sean. Sherrell made a point earlier about the fact that Hubert Davis wasn't really running the same mix of player deployment that he had in the 6-game winning streak. And you could say, maybe that was because of the matchup against Duke. Who knows? But yeah, I agree with you. I think let's see them go back to doing what was working with regard to lineups and what minutes guys were getting and when they were getting them, because I think we'd seen some streamlining with regard to that too. All right, Sherrell, throw a penny at me.
I have a few, but Yeah, man. I think it'll just end with this season. Not to sign off or anything, but just don't know where things will be next Sunday night. And we could be talking about portal stuff. We could be talking about the end of the season. We could be talking about a magnificent run in the ACC tournament. But I think either way, I think there was more on the bone here for UNC as a team. And
Clearly.
you just hate that it took them so long to kind of figure out the right pieces. And that's not assigning blame either, because like you said, better coaches, more esteemed coaches have had trouble kind of hitting the right buttons and figuring out how to get the team going. But they did do that, and it's just kind of a shame, I guess, to bring it back to what we've been talking about for the last hour, that all of their missteps in November and December, players and coaches, is likely going to cost them a trip to the NCAA tournament where anything can happen. So I think that's the biggest, I guess, bummer of it all, is that because of 3 months ago, this team is likely going to be done this time next week. And then, even though the portal doesn't open until March 24th, guys will start, sending people and saying, hey, my intention is to enter the portal, and all that maneuvering and stuff it's been underway. We can confirm that, but it'll really get serious the day after the season's end. So next Monday, even though that's not the portal opening day, 8 days from today is when the action will start. And if UNC isn't in the tournament, then they'll be right there with everybody else scouting and getting ready to go.
Yeah, I would say to everybody listening and watching, think about that 30 minutes against Duke, or specifically when North Carolina made that run to not only cut into the lead but then extend the lead against Duke in the second half. It kind of makes you wonder what could have been had they had their act together earlier in the season. And I think that's probably, it'll probably be one giant, channeling my inner John Bunning, one huge MO. I think that's probably going to be something that a lot of folks think about when they look back on this. And you hate it for guys like R.J. Davis. You hate it for guys like Jalen Withers, who you feel like they were finally onto something, especially Davis, who just did so much for this program. But who knows? Either way, regardless of what we're talking about next week, we will be here next week. We'll talk to you. We will try to do the show live. Again, as always, caveat is schedule's pending. But we'll try to give you some analysis next week. And who knows? Fingers crossed, maybe we're still talking about games to be played in the NCAA tournament. Maybe we're talking about a good weekend. But again, at least from my seat, and since I'm the last one to talk tonight, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, hope might be a 4-letter word going into this week. Don't set yourself up for failure. Just enjoy whatever you get out of it.
I'm still going to let you have the last word, but I'm going to put you on the spot again for the second week in a row. You're going to answer this time.
Damn
Joey.
it, man.
You're going to answer this time. Are you accepting the NIT bid or not?
I wouldn't. I think that you're at this place now where I think that just kind of pours salt in the wound for a lot of folks around the program. The only way I would say accept it is if the players want to play longer, and I can't see that those guys would want to put in a couple more weeks of grueling practice to play games that mean nothing. And even if you win the NIT, what have you really done, right? I think that would probably prolong the agony for them as well. But who knows? If they love ball, maybe they want to go play ball. I wouldn't, but I'm not on the team, don't have a place in the locker room. There's your answer, sir. All right. Appreciate everybody being a part of the show. To John Siegley for producing, to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity for sponsoring. Thanks for everybody who's listening to us. If you have not, please remember, rate, review us if you can. If nothing else, subscribe. YouTube, wherever you're getting your feeds, make sure you subscribe to us. That way, this content, if you so choose, will end up in your feed automatically. You don't even have to go seek us out. We appreciate you making us a part of your podcast listening, YouTube watching, what have you. We're grateful. We will be back next time on the Coast to Coast podcast. I'm Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. Deuces.